Let's take a look at the 2019 Junior Cert Higher Level Paper 1 question 14C. Now the 14C is a standalone question. It's not linked to the 14A and 14B that came before it. It asks us to simply solve a quadratic equation. So our quadratic equation is the equation 2x squared plus 13x minus 3 equals 0. Your first thoughts when you're met with a quadratic equation is this a factorizable quadratic equation? Because if it is, this is the most straightforward and quickest method to solve this equation. So if we had a quick go about trying to solve it, we'd see that it's 2x by x, and then we'd run into problems because this is a quadratic equation that actually isn't factorizable. What is it in the question that tells us that we probably could have avoided trying to factorize it? Well, it says that this question needs to be solved to 3 decimal places. And so anytime a question is to be solved to a number of decimal places, that generally means that we're going to need to use the quadratic formula that's in our maths tables. This formula that we call the minus b formula says that x will be equal to minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So the question then becomes, well, what are the a, b and c that need to be plugged into this formula? We come and we have a look at our quadratic equation, and we need to make sure that it's in the correct format. So the format that we're looking for is that it starts with the x squared term, so ax squared, then it has the x term, bx, and then it has the term independent of x at the end, which we'll call c, equals 0. Oftentimes you might get a quadratic equation and it doesn't look in this format, and we have to rearrange it to make sure that the x squared term comes first, then the x term, and then, as I said, the term independent of x. If the 2x squared was over on the right hand side of the equals, we'd have to somehow bring it over to this side, or if the 2x squared was to the right of the 13x, again we'd have to rearrange it and make sure that the x squared term comes first. So now that it's in the correct format, we can label the a, b and c. A is going to be the number in front of the x squared, which is 2. B is going to be the number in front of the x, which is 13. And c is going to be the number independent of x, which is going to be minus 3. And the minus is really important. If we don't include the minus, the two answers we get at the end will be incorrect. So we write down the formula, and we're going to substitute in for a, b and c the values over here on the left hand side of the page. A couple of places people make mistakes here, and just to watch out for them, is when you're putting in your C number, as I mentioned, if that's a negative number, just make sure you include the minus or you'll have an error in your calculation. And the other place to watch out for is when you're putting in your B value, if that had been a negative number, just to make sure to put a bracket around it. If you square a negative number, we know we get a positive number, but if you don't include the brackets, your calculator actually squares the number first and then adds the minus back onto it, and it becomes a negative number. We're going to do all this bit under the square root, and we get 13 squared is 169, minus 4 by 2 by minus 3 is plus 24. We can simplify that further. 169 plus 24 is 193. You can go from this line here straight down here and get the 193, but the more lines that we write in our calculation, the more likely it is that we'll pick up all the attempt marks if we make an error in the calculations. At this stage we're going to split the sum into 2 parts. So we've kept a plus and a minus in the sum all the way down, only to save ourselves work. The minus b formula really has 2 versions. It has the plus version and the minus version, and we could have written down the plus on the left hand side and then the minus formula on the right hand side, but to save ourselves some work we've kept it together until this point here when we have no choice but to split it up. So it's going to become minus 13 plus root 193 over 4, that will give us one solution. And then we have minus 13 minus root 193 over 4, and that will give us a second solution. If we throw each of these into our calculator and then press the SD button, we'll get 0.223 and we'll get minus 6.723. Just be careful to have a look at the 4th digit after the 0 and make sure that that's not 5 or higher. If that's a number that's 5 or higher, we have to round up the 3rd place, and if it's less than 5, we can keep the digit as it is. So these are our 2 solutions to the quadratic equation. As we can see, factorizing would have been a quicker method were we able to do it, but the hint again was in the question that we needed answers to 3 decimal places, and that told us that the minus b formula was probably going to be the way to go.